I wanted to kick it off with a quote from the CPO of one of the largest consumer goods companies in the world. And this is actually the sentence he used when he addressed his executive team just after a visit to the company NVIDIA on the US West Coast. Actually, what he was telling his executive team was to focus on releasing the power of data and AI in the supply chain and put this as a priority for the company. And I want to bring to life to you why he's saying this. So, and I don't want to sound like Dr. Doom, but we have quite a number of challenges that are actually emerging in supply chains because of today's volatile environment. These are challenges that are going to define the futures of supply chain. First of all, geopolitical tensions, and some speakers already talked about it, but when you look about this, I'm actually referring to the trade restrictions that are imposed globally. This is a graph that I've been maintaining for a couple of years now. They contain the number of trade restrictions imposed globally on raw materials and input materials. So I've excluded trade restrictions on services, and I excluded the trade restrictions that happen on capital investment. I did not put 24 on yet. I'll do so by the end of the calendar year, but I can guarantee you that already now 24 is absolutely confirming the exponential nature of this graph. So what does that mean? It means that we will continue to fuel supply constraints for the raw materials and input materials in the future. We will continue to fuel inflation. And we will actually need to get rid of the assumption that you can globally connect supply chains. And you can connect them seamlessly, you can connect them in some sort of a stable way. When we look at, and this is then mainly for Western economies, the dependency on China is very sensitive. So even recently, we've gotten the request from a client who wanted us to look at their high-tech supply chain and check whether there's any China dependency up to the 9th tier. So let's just think about that. Tier 1 are your suppliers, Tier 2 the suppliers of the suppliers. 9th tier means we're in the natural resource, the mining of the natural resources. The reason they're asking for this is that actually they expect regulation to come starting in the US that will prohibit any dependency on China. Another big challenge, and this is one that's close to my heart and I'm really worried about, and Paul referred to it regularly, but when you look at the frequency of extreme weather events and the speed by which it's going up, and of course this is related to climate change, and the irony is that actually supply chains are the ones that create the biggest emissions in the world. But even today, when you look at the disruption created by any of those extreme weather events, one disruption only, it takes 145 days on average across the industries for things to go back to normal. 145 days. What that means is that if I have a January 1st disruption, it takes till May 25th for things to feel back to normal for one disruption. One disruption only. Another thing that I see, and I think I'm talking to the right group of people here, of procurement leaders, there is a big advantage that comes with supply base. It has a competitive advantage to you. But we came to realize that supplier bases also hold an enormous amount of risk for the future. The disruptions in the end tier that I talked about, you can't sense them, you can't see them, but there's also regulation. The regulation like the European Deforestation Act, the regulations to protect against human rights violation, the use of any unacceptable material, cyber risk, you name it. The other thing we observe is that supply chains today, they're actually, the majority of parts of supply chain are run on manual paper and Excel sheet. The digitization in supply chain is rather immature compared to other functions, especially the sales and marketing the sales and marketing function. And I'll show to you why digitization is important, and I'll go back to the original example of the consumer goods company, but you'll see that there's another key trend of networks in supply chain becoming more complex. And it's actually driven by go-to-market complexity. So the growth strategies of most companies are increasing the complexity of the supply chains. So let me use that consumer goods example where I had the CEO quoted. So we start with the consumer, obviously. The traditional supply chain has two channels to market. It's a channel via retail and a distributor channel. The sites, the plants, the manufacturing plants, they are one network. That network has a stable allocation of which SKU get produced in what site. You have a stable allocation of global, regional, local suppliers that serve every one of those sites, and it's a stable supply chain. Where is this going? First of all, there is a trend of asset light in manufacturing. What that means for this particular company is they are trending towards having 1,000 co-packers and co-manufacturers on top of the sites that they own as a company. It also means that the global, regional, local allocation of suppliers is actually becoming very dynamic because of trade restrictions, and they're managing all of these particular disruptions that come with the end tier. And this was the easy part, because if I now go to the routes to market to the consumer, we're adding a dozen channels. We're adding the channel of direct marketplaces, direct to consumer, JD.com, Amazon.com type of marketplaces. We're adding customization. This company is experimenting with nano factories. The factories are on the back of a truck for hyper-personalization, the last mile personalization, and the truck moves to where the demand is like. Retailers, if you want to serve retailers today, you have to actually serve 50 or 100 micro-fulfillment centers rather than one regional DC. Curbside pickup, extended aisle are all things that you enable with your supply chain, and they're part of this go-to-market strategy. And then on top of this, I'm adding the return flows. The packaging has to come back. The waste streams have to be treated. Now look at this network. Look at the complexity of the future supply chain networks. It is humanly impossible to optimize this. The only way you can do this is that you release the power of all the extensive data that sits in this network. You put the intelligence and you put it in the hands of network orchestrators that can optimize this supply chain. They optimize it cost service, they add sustainability metrics, and they do it to make it resilient, so it's more agile, it's faster reactions to any disruption. This is the reason why the CEO is saying, we gotta AI the hell out of our supply chain. Because when you look at this network, it has 50% more kilometers traveled for one case of finished good. Cost of goods sold will go up by 800 basis points in this sort of evolution of supply chains. It is unsustainable. This is also where digitization comes in. You cannot release the power of data if you haven't digitized this. Anything manual, Excel sheet based, will make it too slow, will make it non-connected in terms of data, and will be inaccurate. So when you look at this network, the digital capabilities that underpin this optimization, I want to talk to you about what those most differentiated capabilities are. And we worked with IDC and Gartner to identify a set of Horizon 2 capabilities. Those are the ones that we call, look, the Horizon 2 for us is 26 to 2030. Scaled adoption by 50% of the G2000, the 2,000 biggest companies in the world. That's how we called the expectation of the forecast of these digital capabilities and how they will get adopted in this Horizon 2. So let me share a little bit of those with you. The first one is entire supply sensing. This means that you have the areas of vulnerability in your entire supplier network. You have a digital twin that models this, and you connect the nodes with external data sources to sense disruptions, sense any issues that exist against compliance and other risk areas. Another one we see, and this is actually following the track that we've seen in manufacturing. So in manufacturing, there's a clear journey of digitization manufacturing all the way up to lights out manufacturing, dark manufacturing, full autonomous manufacturing sites. That's the evolution we're on. We see exactly the same happening in warehouses, but it happens with a slight delay compared to the manufacturing journey. The reason this warehouse is on that journey is faster picking, omni-channel, across the channel type of picking, and more accurate order management is driving this. I talked to a few people from PepsiCo, and I think there's PepsiCo also in the room. They have a great program called Any SKU through any channel to any customer. And that is the omni-channel, multi-channel, almost channel-agnostic fulfillment that they're driving as a unique capability. Circular operations. So this is, look, the principles of circular economy are well understood by most companies. And Paul also referred to it regularly when he was talking. The translation of those principles into the supply chain of the future, that's where we are ill-prepared, and we're just at the start of that journey. Fashion was pushed by regulation to do this much faster now, but we expect clearly track and trace and other capabilities in circularity to become a Horizon 2 differentiated capability. We also expect in the industries where it's relevant that the after-sales supply chain, so your returns, your repairs, is where we're going to see this digitization happening faster. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is a nice example. They have 87% of this after-sales supply chain run autonomously. The other thing we see is it's all connected together through the next level of control tower. We call it the nerve center. So this is not your logistics or transportation control tower or your materials planning control tower. This is actually the thing that connects all of it, your network. This actually needs very advanced demand planning and sensing capabilities. It needs capabilities where, for example, you no longer work with what-if scenarios. What-if is outdated. It is optimization that runs thousands of what-if scenarios and recommends to you the best next actions that you need to do in this sort of complex network. And then last but not least, every role in supply chain, every future role will get augmented with generative AI. And I sometimes get asked the question, is generative AI a hype? Well, frankly, I don't think it's the right question. Because when you look at some of the characteristics of Gen AI, it is the thing that releases the power of mathematical AI. It releases the power of our solvers in supply chain. And without solvers, we cannot survive. And how does it do that? First of all, it creates a human-like interface, so you can actually interact with the solvers. You can get explainability. It can start leveraging unstructured data, like your SNOP meeting minutes, your client incidents, your client prioritization. It can start using that in the explainability. And then last but not least, it generates things, and it doesn't generate 10x graphs. That's not what it generates for supply chain. What it generates for supply chain is, for example, machine learning Python code. So let's think about that. When you're an orchestrator of a network, and you can have Python code generated that changes the parameters of your solvers, you can go into more continuous planning. You can go into more continuous execution, which is way better than these monthly cycles that we live in today. So continuous planning and execution is the holy grail where generative AI will play a critical role. And you know what? I do realize that if you look at the promises of digital technologies, It's very different from the reality today. The promise of it's easy to implement. It's easy to scale. You will get access to full innovation all the time. You will get the value immediately. And I think you've all heard of this. I realize that the reality is very different on the ground. And you know what the biggest issue is? Is the scaling. The real scaling across suppliers, across warehouses, across channels, across your SKUs. Scaling with confidence is the real issue that we're facing in supply chain. And I want to demonstrate that to you. It's quite advanced research that we do every 2 years. It's with 1,200 companies. Just to explain the graph, it is a distribution graph. So when you look at the height of every bar, it is the number of companies. And it shows us on an x-axis of digital maturity. And we measure digital maturity by looking at the average across Horizon Basic, Horizon 1, 2, 3 type of capability. And it's measured by how well somebody has scaled this adoption. A couple of observations. The average is 36%. So that's why I'm saying that nearly 2/3 of digitization in supply chain in the world still needs to happen. We're 1/3 there. The other thing you can observe, look at the distribution graph. This is not at all a normal distribution. The average actually is in the valley between two peaks. And so the companies on the left, stuck in proof of concept, stuck in experiments, unable to scale. The one on the right side, they've been able to scale Basic and Horizon 1 capabilities, and they're now very rapidly testing more advanced capabilities. When you think autonomous, 1%, 12 companies only. It is advanced what they're doing. So there's one company, a high-tech company we're working with. This is what they're achieving. The ambition, the Northstar. 40% revenue increase needs to be supported with a supply chain of 40% less people than today, 23% less working capital. What are they doing? They're creating an agentic architecture, so about 120 virtual autonomous agents that are sitting in a workflow and autonomously decide. We've got a few things up and running, like inventory deployment decisions, about 17,000 a week, are 100% done autonomously. Very advanced, but it is only 1% today. When you look at the type of metrics that they drive, the 145 days that I talked about is becoming 34 days. On time and in full as a measure for success in customer service, plus 6%. Labor productivity on average with these 12 companies is 31% productivity. And then, of course, emission reduction, lead times to new product introduction, you name it. Now, if I go back to the difference between the ones on the left stuck in proof of concept, the ones on the right that have been able to scale, we have observed 3 things that they're doing differently. 3 things that make the difference between stuck in proof of concept and the ability to scale. And I want to bring to life to you what those 3 things are that we have observed. First of all, they have a North Star. They have a vision of where they're going, and it is signed off by the executive team. Meaning they do not have to defend every single time in an environment of the not invented here syndrome that they want to implement a new capability or a new use case. It is the North Star, the vision. Remember, 40% more revenue, 40% less people, 23% less working capital, a North Star vision of an agentic architecture. That was an example of a high-tech company. It's out there. It's signed off by the board. It's signed off by the executive team. The rest is a journey towards that scaling. It's a very different mindset than somebody who starts with an experiment. Oh, this is a good experiment. Let me now move to the next one, and then try to defend the entire company to scale this use case. You will be dead by 1,000 paper cuts by the time you actually have scaled 2 of those use cases. It does not work. The second one we've seen is the data foundation. And it sounds technical, but I'm deadly serious about this. We see every company run into this data wall. You need a modern data foundation. You need data that is curated, one single version of the truth. It is connected with external data sources. It has a semantic layer on top of it where you translate tribal knowledge for people into that semantic layer. You need a modern data architecture. Without this, you cannot scale these new capabilities. And it is one hell of a lot of work to get a modern data foundation out. If your company does not want to invest in that modern data foundation, forget about supply chain reinvention. Forget about the dreams that procurement and everybody is talking about. It will not work. And then last but not least, human adoption. Of course, it's at the center of it, but this is, just think about a pilot of a plane and how long it takes before a pilot can run a plane and trusts the autopilot. It is about trust. We have to create trust in these new AI models. So the way this happens is the absolute logic of actually creating trust with the AI models from day one, and that's what those scalers are doing differently. So let me leave you with one thought. AI is not going to replace any human being. AI is going to replace every human being who does not want to work with AI. So I think it's our obligation to fundamentally make sure that we create trust in these AI models as leaders in procurement and in supply chain, and bring our people along. Thank you very much.